Hello everyone and welcome! When Pike was released, I promised you guys that we will have a look at a Nexus post that explains how Riot writes their stories, how they are structured, and why BIOS even exist besides short stories, or color stories as Riot calls it. While usually I would go through the entire post and read it word for word, and then react to it afterwards, this time I will choose a different approach. You can still go and read the post for yourselves if you want, because here I will break the post into multiple parts and I will try to retell its content in my own words. This way I can hit on the more important parts a little bit better. And especially with this post, let me tell you, there are a lot of interesting points. So, the entire post is called Diving into Champion BIOS. Obviously the pun is intended because we'll talk about Nautilus and Pike. And the entire thing was written by Thermalkitten, whom we know as the author of stories such as The Bird and the Branch, Starfall, or the recent Confessions of a Broken Blade saga. So, let's get right into it. Right at the beginning, Thermalkitten says that this post was put together in cooperation with Skethloke, the lead narrative editor at Riot Games, whom I see as the big lore boss at Riot Games. Even though again, don't forget that putting out stories is a massive teamwork. The credit usually doesn't go to a single person. Anyway, let's start with the shortest version of lore Riot can release, the short bio. Some of you may falsely think that this is the classic bio that Riot usually releases with a new or reworked champion. I know I thought so. But short bio is actually the story that you can read inside your clients. When you click on a champion there, the League of Legends client will show you all the available skins and a tiny version of the champion's story. One of the reasons why it is there is because it can help players decide if they would like to play that champion, since the champion's archetype might be appealing to them. Up until recently, these short bios were all over the place. Sometimes the client showed you the entire story of a champion. This happened with characters that didn't have a lot of lore behind them. And sometimes there were only 1 or 2 sentences. This happened for characters that didn't really even fit into the new universe. And sometimes there was no lore at all. Since this caused a lot of confusion, Riot decided to make short bios a thing, and they decided to standardize the in-client lore last November. Since the point is to let players read the story in about the same time it takes you to get into a queue, the stories are usually kept in the 80 to 100 words range, or in other words, about 4 sentences. So in those 4 sentences you have to tell where the champion came from and what's their personality. And finding the right words for that may not be so easy. It is also important to note that this short story doesn't contain all the details. So when the community went mad about the champion's history being changed, you have to keep in mind that's not actually happening. Riot just needs to keep it short, and the full lore will always end up on Universe. Thankfully in February Riot managed to put a Learn More button in the client, which brings up their full story. And speaking of full story, let's move on to the second kind of stories you may encounter. And this one might be the most common. The full bios. Make no mistake, these stories are also focused on summarizing the champion's backstory. It's just that this time it comes to around 600 words. But if a champion is more complicated, it may get bumped up a bit. Just going from the top of my mind, I think Leona currently has the longest full bio in League, but I might be mistaken. Thermalkitten also answered the question, why have a word count restriction at all? Apparently it may seem like a great idea to have unlimited word count to really tell a good story, but in reality there are 2 reasons to limit them. First of all, even the full bio is still supposed to highlight the more important events of a champion's life. That's why it is called bio or biography. Bios usually tell what the character has done, but it doesn't necessarily tell it from the view of the character. That wouldn't be a bio, that would be a story. It's the same as reading a history book against a history fiction. The history book will tell you all the facts straight away, but a fiction lets you go on an adventure with that character. So remember, even a full bio covers all the events that influence that champion's life on a more basic level. And it should be because of the champion's bio that you would want to read more about them. The second reason for a word count restriction is that it forces the writers to be more exact. When your words are limited, every word must have its meaning. It helps the writers to understand what really matters to who the champion is. Since the full bio points at all the important facts about a champion, It is important that Riot goes back and adds in information whenever a new event arrives. This happened recently with Yasuo and Riven after the story Confessions of a Broken Blade finished. So how does any of this apply to crafting a new story or rewriting an older champion? Thankfully, Thermal Kitten gives us Nautilus as a great example. Before November, Riot left Nautilus alone for two reasons. First of all, his story didn't go against the world of Runeterra, by which they really mean that the Summoners or the Institute of War wasn't mentioned there. And the second reason was that his story didn't go against other champions. However, Nautilus' story wasn't deep either, so he fell into the category quoted as not an immediate emergency, but we'll revisit if that changes. And change it did. As the team started working on Pyke, his story was all about betrayal shaping his character, and being affected by a mysterious source of power. Suddenly, Nautilus' story started going against another champion, since they became very similar, and Riot had to change something. So, like always, the narrative team started asking questions. Why is he the way he is? What was the power that touched him? Where did it come from? And why does it still push him ever forward? By the way, notice how this pretty much confirms that Riot is planning ahead. They know what those powers are because they need to write the stories around them. So Riot knows what was the power that touched Pyke, and they likely know what is the demon that Swain controls. In our desire to find a place that made more sense for Nautilus in the lore, we had undermined something that players had previously loved about him. Thermal Kitten later confirmed that Riot also does a lot of theory crafting around what could be, meaning that they always have a couple different explanations they can use, and they decide on one before it is even made public. Again, meaning that in the case of Nautilus, his background was fully implemented into the working League of Legends universe. And here they chose to connect him to Nagake Boros. They mentioned that this was partially done to put some distance between him and Pyke, which makes me think that maybe Nagake Boros really has nothing to do with Pyke. Peculiar. Anyway, back when Riot updated nearly all of the short bios, which was about 140, the community didn't really like the new image of Nautilus. To some people, making him work for Ilawi's god made him feel less like a champion in his own right. So while Riot made sure his lore makes sense, they undermined something the players loved about him. Nautilus proved to be quite a challenge, and both Skethloke and Thermal Kitten joined Riot long after Nautilus came to League, so simply making him work was unique in its own way. And certainly, if something doesn't go according to the plan, and it hasn't this time, it is quite an exercise in humility. It's not that easy being a writer in this way, and you really have to look at what else should we as the writers learn about the world. Nautilus was much more than his armored bulk. He was a lost soul, dragged down by darkness, but one that persevered no matter what. So the team started there. The question, what else do we not know about the armored Goliath, arrived. But before they did anything, they contacted a bunch of Nautilus players and they also posted a question on the boards. They wanted to know what the community feels is the key part of Nautilus. And so the community told them. At first the post trickled in, but soon it was a torrent. In over 1,000 posts covering 50 pages on the boards, Nautilus players made themselves heard. And Riot read all of it. All of it. In the end, Nautilus' character meant a lot to players. He wasn't an empty shell as some might have thought, dragged down by darkness, but one that endured no matter what. He was the embodiment of inescapable dread, of burdens that cannot be put down, and the will to survive even the most intense pressures. In his anchor and his lonely drudge across the bottom of the sea, there were beautiful metaphors for dealing with depression. Through all of this, even his betrayal, Nautilus wasn't evil. Inside the diving suit was still the soul of a man. His final bio landed in at about 715 words. A little longer than a normal bio, which was needed with all the stuff that Nautilus had to go through. But then Thermal Kitten left a quote that made me uneasy. For those of you with discerning eye, there are a few sentences that we could have trimmed out to get us closer to the 600 words. But as fans of Easter eggs, Skethloke and I left them in for reasons. This means that we can dig out more information if we go deeper into Nautilus' background. The last part of this post is about the mistakes. What happens when they get it wrong? And let's be honest, Even with so much writing experience, it may still happen. Sometimes Riot changes something one person doesn't like, but that person can get vocal and suddenly there is a chain reaction. You have to remember that Riot's intentions are good, and usually they look ahead for a better change in the long run. For example, while they sacrificed the old Varus, the new version of him was a perfect setup for the new Darkin lore. But if it happens that you really don't like something about a new change, it is important to tell Riot why. Why did you not like the change? Because if you don't tell them, they won't know how to fix it. Karma's bio is a good example of this. You may have noticed that we didn't cover her on this channel. That's because there is a chance that her story might still get changed. When Riot released her bio, it didn't land the way they hoped it would. But they listened to the complaints and now they are trying to improve based on that feedback. Again, you just have to tell Riot why you don't like certain things. And at the very end of that post, Thermal Kitten confirmed that Soraka is on the list for updated bio. I can't wait till people get mad that Soraka isn't part of Warwick's lore anymore. I can't wait till they tell me how interesting the old non-interesting lore really was. And if Riot somehow makes it work, if they make Soraka part of Warwick's background, I will be impressed. Because to me, that seems impossible. But that is going to be it for this video. This was a post that I really wanted to talk about in more detail, because it relates to what we do on this channel. We talk about lore and news, and this kinda counts as both. So, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like it and subscribe for more lore and news. There is a bell button, don't forget the legendary bell button, it actually notifies you unlike the subscribe button. Screw the subscribe button, click the bell. If you'd like to check our social media, Twitch merch and P.O.Box will be in the description. Of course, massive shout out to our patrons for going the extra mile, you guys are absolutely amazing. And with that, thank you all so much for being here and for your support, you know I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you, come again.